So we tried to focus down on this topic with really two key angles. Obviously, if you're going to drive value, there's going to be some challenges. We're going to start with the panelists talking about some of the challenges they've seen and how they've seen organizations overcome them. Then we're going to flip, obviously, to the positive side of what are some of the tips they have to succeed. And so with that, if we talk about some of the challenges, you know, Laura, I know you've obviously worked for one of the biggest companies in the world that is also a massive player in the AI space, and certainly you've seen some challenges both within your large organization, but also the clients that you worked with. Tell us a little bit about some of those that you've seen people struggle with.
Yeah, and it's largely why I've actually left Microsoft and joined a venture-backed startup of 6 partners in the healthcare space, because it was very hard for me to watch as we tried to industry by industry go through and sort of purport that this is going to solve X, when that's not the reality. And I think most people in the hype cycle have a leader of some sort. Maybe it's a CEO in a smaller company, maybe it's your boss who's gone to some conference, heard about AI, think it's going to solve X problem, and then they want to run and go do it. And I don't want to belabor this, but the reality of the world where we are today, yes, we've taken a step with agentic, that's going to be fantastic, but who's thinking about the management of those agents to agents? Once you have agents popping up everywhere, we're going to be back into the same proliferation of spreadsheets when that was a problem way back when. Most of you are probably too young to know when people complained about, I've got spreadsheets that are databases under someone's desk and they're running our business. The reality is we're not going to get rid of that. And so we're going to just have these pop-ups of agents and have pop-ups of data and pop-ups of dashboards, and that's what we're seeing largely. That management is not sexy, it's not fun. And it's not meant to curtail the work that we're doing, but it's, the biggest challenge I see in wide-scale adoption is fully understanding that ecosystem to understand who your audience is that are developing these. It's not just data scientists anymore, and then bridging together those data scientists with your app developers. If nothing else, is understanding that data science finishes here, and in a well-orchestrated system, there's a handoff to some type of app developer who then integrates it and takes it to the next level to productionalize it. Maybe it's an ML ops engineer, maybe it's an AI ops, I don't know, however your organization is set up. But that bridge between that world is where it often falls down, because this side of the house doesn't understand all these different agents and what they're supposed to do, and this side of the house doesn't care what they do. And I can say that from personal experience. We need to bridge that gap so that we don't just end up having this tremendous amount of wealth and awesome stuff that has been built that could help the business, living in social isolation.
So I remember in the days of spreadsheet proliferation when people would try and make the argument that no, what they had built really was scalable because they put some of the data into an Access database, not just an Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly.
So be suspicious if you hear someone make that argument. That's my advice. Joseph, you work for a large company, Equifax, who's in more of a traditional company in a heavily regulated industry. So how do you work around both those organizational and regulatory constraints to enable innovation and such?
Yeah, I'll start off by echoing some of what she was saying about our leadership and what they understand about what AI is. So it all started with education for our executive leadership, for what AI is, what we could do, what we may not be able to do, but then ultimately passing that down through the executive leadership into the individual BUs, and potentially some new training that came about from that. And then, involving legal and compliance sooner rather than later was very critical, because we all know legal's initial response is, no, you can't do it. So get them on board pretty quick. But, ultimately our regulators, they're really comfortable with governance structures. So setting up that AI governance committee, very critical, but the important piece of that is who are your members? They should be your ultimate trusted leaders across all of your BUs, as well as your product teams, your legal and compliance team, your existing risk structures that you might already have, whether that's general risk management and strategic, or if it's model risk. But that group really can then generate all the different AI use cases from all the BUs, roll them up, and then we can categorize them, because what we ultimately found out is a lot of the use cases don't need AI. We've already done it. You just don't have the data science to do it, so go partner with the Center of Excellence teams or your other individual BUs. But more importantly, then we can risk tier them and then assign them to a risk. And certain low risk things like operational efficiency, no government agency is going to care if you got human in the loop. But the higher risk things, that's where we need to be more cautious But also, I'd say government agencies today and globally are starting to emphasize responsible AI principles that go beyond potentially things like fair, accountable, and transparent. And so potentially developing your own responsible AI principles is very good here. And then ultimately, interactions with our regulators help us drive them to understand what we're doing and get them on board, because they're in the realm of, they don't really know what Gen AI is going to do and what the downsides are and what the upsides are. And we've had to actually innovate around machine learning just to get our regulators comfortable, because at Equifax, we'd have direct impact on consumers with the credit scores and things like that. We'll make sure our consumers are treated appropriately, so even when we did machine learning, we had to innovate there and educate our regulators and get them on board, and they said, yeah, that makes sense. So don't be afraid to talk to them.
So, based on something you mentioned about lawyers, I have a conspiracy theory for you all. I heard this from someone I knew who thought they knew someone who one day might have had something to do with the legal industry. And what they said is that lawyers have bugs placed in their office, and if they're heard saying yes too often, they get disbarred. So just keep that in mind. Joshua, so you're kind of coming from the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You work for a smaller organization that's working with companies to help them implement their own solutions, both large and small companies. So what are some of the headwinds you think are specific to smaller, less resource-rich organizations as they're attempting to enter the world of AI today?
I think that the first problem that everybody has to figure out is that actually the use case is not the answer. I think a use case actually defines too narrow of a thought pattern in terms of where you'd apply AI. AI is far too intelligent, it's far too capable, and a use case actually is assembled to have IT people talk to business people, and that was the instrument with RUP and Rational Unified Language. And we actually use case synonymous with idea curation inside of business planning. I find that the largest uphill battle is breaking that mold first. You got to think of horizontal capabilities, broad capabilities across many, many use cases, cross-functional lines. I think because of the fundamental changes that are happening predicated on AI is actually business architecture change. And so what I mean is that it's less about AI and its practical usage and the use case. It's more about re-engineering the process and collapsing horizontal processes and applying AI to actually manage that process. So I think breaking the mold, like we should not be talking about use cases anymore. We should be talking about broad range capabilities, and these broad range capabilities should allow you to rethink business architecture. I think the rise of process reengineering is really 2025 into 2026. And when you think about it that way, some of these obstacles that we have in terms of what AI does and what it doesn't do, who cares? Like if you've got a capability plan, frankly speaking, you can apply AI in a horizontal, whether it's a skilled labor capability or whether it's augmenting someone, you're applying the AI to the re-engineered process itself. And I think that's what creates clarity, and I think that's independent of smaller companies up through the enterprise or enterprise select.
That's some good advice. Let's switch gears a little bit now, focus on the positives. So I guess, Laura, for you, obviously you've worked with a bunch of organizations over time, and internally and externally. What are some of the strategies you've seen have repeatedly led to success for organizations as they pursue AI?
Yeah, I mean, it never hurts when the customer you're working with publicly shouts out the work that you've done. And so I'm just going to self-brag here a little bit, so forgive me. During the Super Bowl 2 years ago at Allegiant Stadium, they came to us asking, because they wanted to follow our sustainability journey. And they said, how do we get fans to help us get our LEED certification? I mean, seriously, how do you get fans who are oftentimes drinking, imbibing, and having a great time to care about recycling? And so through the process of implementing, using the existing cameras and computer vision to, those that had opted in as fans, be able to record when they threw their waste into the blue bin, that was a quantifiable measure, and the fan did it, so we could then trigger a set of haptics points that could go to their phone that they could say, "Ooh, I could spend this in, the stadium today." And during the Super Bowl, they implemented this, and they, the Allegiant managers posted, bounding boxes around the gentleman throwing. You could see the videos him like looking, because he knew he was getting something, and he was confused, and then he threw it in the blue bin, and I was like holding my breath, like, "Yay, he did it right." And that to me is the best success you can do. It doesn't have to be a public acknowledgement of that, but I think the successes that we see in our wins aren't celebrated enough and not talked about enough. I mean, we probably all have a library of use cases and things we've done and worked on. And to your point, it isn't about the point solution. And this is largely why I'm doing this venture with my 5 other partners on our own, is because when you build something and you think about it horizontally and you think more about the process, that process is critical. You'll either have your AI and data science living over here, but it's not integrated into your business flow, what they do every day to execute. And so I couldn't agree more, and I think that's where the wins are. 1, celebrating and having your wins shouted out, whether you do it to yourself or broadly, and 2, taking those wins but re-asking yourself, did I bring this into the process that's going to touch, not just the person or the group that I was told to build this for, but everybody? And I think that's where we are and getting to, and that's where the wins that I've seen at least are the strongest.
I think that's a great point about you have to give people the incentive to actually utilize it, because it can be an amazing potential sitting right there if they don't do it. I think with someone I talked yesterday, I still do this. I hit the phone agent. I'm just hitting 00 or pound, and it could be a really totally modern, awesomely useful chat agent, but I'm not giving it the chance because I'm assuming it's not. And
It's not going to be
that's
good.
Were
on
you
me.
calling your attorney?
Yeah.
You said yes too much.
He said yes.
Yeah. They probably, yeah. I'm afraid to ask my attorney if I'm allowed to stop doing that because they'll say no, and then I'll be trapped forever. So, Joseph, in your experience then, obviously in a large company that you've worked in, several of them, obviously there's some technical, business process, interpersonal, we've already hit on that. What are some of the things you've seen help break through that to get some success?
Yeah, so I'll go back to the governance committee and why it's so important to have appropriate leaders on that process, because they really can bridge the gap between us quants and engineers in terms of getting into BUs that don't have that. Even at a large organization, there are BUs at Equifax that don't have a quant team. So they come up to our Global Center of Excellence, which I report up through, and they look for us to provide guidance and get that relationship going. But that leadership group is not shy to talk about their successes. And oftentimes, all you got to do is be successful in one area, where, let's be honest, that leader's got more clout than I do. But he says, Joseph's team did a really good job. They cared about what we did. We did all that good work. Why don't you go reach out to them? And then all of a sudden, our power starts to expand. But ultimately, with our AI processes, what we've really kind of have to streamline at Equifax and other large organizations is that procurement process. Because those of us that are taking 2 years to implement a large language model today, we're already obsolete. That's not good, so we're going to make sure that that's a much quicker process. And then we actually have a pretty good DNA University session that we host twice a week, where we allow our data and analytics and data science teams to present about the projects that they've worked on. And so that education of our internal workforce via each other is very important. Because what happens then is somebody finds out that my team worked on some generative AI with business names and says, wait a second, there's tariffs going on in Canada. Can you help us out there? Well, that sounds pretty cool. And then they get that free of charge. Within a couple days, they got all of our solutions, very importantly. And we also invite our external speakers. So Bill comes in at least once a year and gives us presentations, because we need to understand what the other parts of the world are doing. And at Equifax and large corporations, we might be a little bit slower because of regulation. So having that outside knowledge of where are you succeeding, very critical and important. So that's kind of where I'm at.
All right. And Joshua, in your case, obviously, be more with the consulting side and working with a lot of different clients. What are some of the traits of a client that you feel really good when you have that initial meeting and they say, let's go do something, that you think they'll be able to succeed?
I think I've delivered probably 1,000 plus transformations in my time. I would say the common themes that I see are an absolute obsession on the P&L, the net effect. And that means someone really understands business process. And so when you think about deploying AI or an intelligent endpoint, the first thing that they do is they want to understand the net effect of the P&L. And what that means is you really, truly understand the potential of the strategy and the transformation, the phases and the horizons. I think the second trait is someone that thinks about governance. I hear you mention governance a lot. Governance not just from simply governing the technology in play, but actually holding the technology accountable. So it's a form of central intelligence. So for every deployed AI instance or deployed intelligent agent or agentic, it should report into a central intelligence in terms of the meaning of good relative to its net effect on the P&L. And I think that business teams and transformation teams that think in that very simple kind of fabric are those that are actually going to collapse processes and reshape the business architecture that I was mentioning before. What we know about banks are not going to be banks anymore, right? What we know about risk modeling is not going to be risk modeling anymore. What we know about financial lending and eligibility, it's not going to be it's just not the same. And so the people that think about the net effect of the P&L are the people that can look through what would be traditional lines of business and traditional functional areas and actually have AI actually play a role, actually collapsing it, and then holding it accountable to the P&L, and then having the mechanics of system implementation of reporting into really central governance from central intelligence. And there's going to be a rise of kind of the macro intelligence and then kind of the micro intelligence when you think of kind of agentic reporting into something. There's supervised and unsupervised, distributed and centralized. And I think people that think about those three things that I mentioned early on, that's going to be the winner.
Yeah, I guess that willingness to change is underlying theme there. If they're not willing to really try and adapt, measure, take it seriously, then it's very hard to succeed if you're otherwise lip service, right?
It's a ubiquitous language when we talk about return on investment capital, or when I talk about the top or bottom line effect on the P&L. And so it doesn't matter whether I'm a finance person, it doesn't matter whether I'm a salesperson, it doesn't matter of risk. If I can actually quantify the innovation in those terms, it's really a good thought pattern, and then you can deploy AI in a way that actually benefits the business at scale. And when you think about thousands of agents that will ripple through kind of an enterprise, taking over really hybrid roles within inside the enterprise, you have to have that thinking. Because if you don't, you're just deploying technology for technology's sake. It's backwards.
So one thing you all know, wouldn't know this, but I'll tell you, these guys deserve kudos because I've moderated a variety of panels over time, and the problem is always that one or more panelists rambles on for so long that you run out of time. So I actually had these questions. I said, and in the unlikely event that we have time left over, and they actually all fit in perfect. This is awesome. So I'm going to throw one out, and raise your hand, whoever wants to handle this one first. One thing that I was talking to someone this morning about is how crazy it is, the speed of the evolution. So yesterday, I saw in the morning the person from Google did a demo, and she showed, all this, and it came up this morning again, all this code doing an entire analytic process from one prompt rather quickly. And I remember it was only 4 or 5 months ago, it was little snippets of code that might be kind of okay. And so in a few months, it's just blown away. So how do you keep up with product cycles, development cycles, when by the time you've even kind of gotten something, it's already completely outdated in now months or weeks instead of quarters or years?
I'll take it. First of all, I don't think it's as fast as you think. I think prediction will get cheaper over time. I would say that the rate by which we're innovating with AI is we're still using an inquiry-based intelligence system, meaning I need to know the question to ask to go to the prompt. And so if you look across the last 2 years, we're still prompt engineering. I think if you were to shift your mindset and think about proactive, assertive AI and what its role should be and how you may design it to have a more important role to be proactive and react based on, role of responsibilities or objectivity or risk, you would actually think about your AI implementation entirely different. And so until we as a community stop thinking that every person knows the right question to ask, therefore, we're dumbing AI down to what the question someone might have, I actually don't think we're innovating fast enough. Now, predictions are like light bulbs, like really expensive. 1910, we had one, and now I've got 100 in my I just don't even know the brand of the light bulb. I have lots of LEDs. It's really cheap. So that the model side of this, I think, will continue to advance, but it's actually not the important part. Like putting it to work inside of work process and work re-engineering, and then having it be assertive, maybe tell me what I should think about to prompt me, then I actually don't think that I agree with the innovation. I think we're doing it backwards still.
I'm curious, can I have a follow-up? So,
Yeah.
I agree very much with you, and I believe that where we're getting to, if we, outside the hype cycle of agents, is the agent that is instructing the agent to do and ask and prompt those right things after learning from a behavior pattern it sends in the process. And I think that piece of it is so missed, is that process understanding. That business process, I guarantee you there's SMEs in your company that understand it to a T, but it is not part of those agents that are being built today. So everyone talks about personalized X, personalized customer service, personalized healthcare, personalized banking, but it isn't really personalized because that takes a very individual you model, and we don't have that ability today. We expect you to know what to ask about your health and then expect that system to deliver that right information. And it can be very point, and it can give you the answer. Here's your, insurance. Here's when last you saw. But it's not going to then tell you, we had a molecular breakthrough of this drug discovery, and it turns out that it is going to affect these 5 things that you may not have heard about, and these 5 things will lead to these outcomes, which maybe aren't what was initially designed for, but it turns out it's having a positive effect. That level of information when you are sick is something that people want. It's Dr. Google in the past. They want to be able to have a flow that helps sort of surround them. Physicians, in the clinical space, of course, but tying that all together. I just watched my best friend go through getting a BRCA test 1, which is the genetic mutation that says you're likely or 60% likely to get breast cancer. Her family has it, so she's high risk, she's young. She went and got a mammogram, which was abnormal. And none of these things were tied together. Not tied with the advancements being made in imaging of AI, not tied together with the advancements of AI when it comes to the molecules and the genes around medicine and what we're doing with that. And that, to me, seems like the gap. And so we can talk about personalized healthcare, but until we get that flow, that process around those different clinicians, those different people, the people that own the different pieces of that process in the clinical space, and you can take that to any industry, because you always have people in different chiefs that own different parts, until we can tie that together without expecting the end consumer or user to ask the right question or to input the right information, we're not going to actually get to being able to be this relevant, useful, system of systems, if you will.
But AI knows more than I know.
Of course.
Therefore, it should ask me questions.
No, that's what I'm saying with the agent managing the agents.
But even without agent-to-agent protocols right now, just if we just think about prompt engineering, I have to ask the question to get the answer. If we just think about engineering our AI solutions just a little bit different, just have it be proactive with what it knows relative to me, my role and responsibility, I guarantee you, you would engineer the system slightly different. You would have it interact with work process slightly different. And I don't need AI to advance anymore to do this. I could do this today. I could do it right now.
I'd say that obviously setting up a sandbox so you can quickly test, which larger organizations typically have to do in non-production environments, of course. But those workflows that you're testing, to your point, does it actually provide value immediately or not, or am I going to actually have to customize it? Those are the questions I think we have to look at as we start to think about how fast these models are changing and integrating into our systems.
I think your point about proactivity, one of the things that jumped out at me most in that demo yesterday was the code got generated, it had an error, and instead of it just stops, it actually went and took itself proactively through another iteration to say, I got this error. What does that error mean? How would I fix it? And then it fixed it. And to me, that was kind of another level in terms of it's no longer just waiting for that prompt for me to say, how would you fix this? It's picking up, I gotta fix this. So with about a minute and a half left, let's get real quick final thought in terms of bullish, bearish, or undecided. How much should we all be fearing for our jobs because of AI in the data science community? You think we're safe, unsafe? Let's go down, quick gut feeling.
I'm actually terrified by the technology, and I say this in a way that's also inspiring too. I'm going to try to be. I think the technology is advancing so fast that if you're in the engineering of the model itself, I would be concerned. I think if you're in the interest area of building business process change, I think it's the most exciting thing that we could be working on. And so I think that's where the next era of rethinking businesses, what it means to actually be an enterprise, that's where the value will be over the next 5 years.
Joseph?
From a regulatory standpoint, not afraid at all. I got to be able to explain everything that they're doing personally. So I'm not really worried. But AI is not going to replace my domain expertise and my data expertise. So it may replace a lot of my coding. That's fine. Heck, I already Google it anyways. Now I do ChatGPT or Gemini. Not too worried about it, quite honestly, because I'm regulated.
Yeah, I think there is not a lot you should be worried about. You know, I mean, it could eat you up worrying about that in your job to start to evolve into another area. I mean, I think that should be part of your continuous learning anyway. You know, when I was a statistician at Apple working on Siri and NLP, it wasn't like I was going to stick there and say that's only the type of algorithms I'm ever going to work on. I started to experiment and play with other things that came from more of my education and tapping back into that. And then they said, you want to become a Six Sigma black belt at Expedia? I'm like, why not? And that's how I learned all about process and why process is so important. So I just say yes, do the year of yes to everything you get offered at work. It may not sound like your job, but just do it. You may hate it, but you'll at least have learned something. And it will feed into your brain that is rented out too much space to the, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna have a job because of what I'm doing today. I'm instead rent the space out to that which is gonna, fill your apartment with your next opportunity.
Well, one last dig at lawyers. If you want to save any jobs you're worried about, just say we need to ask the lawyers if we can replace these jobs with AI. The answer will be no. Anyway, let's thank the panelists. I think you have some good